The Space Wolves occupy an unusual position in the Imperium of Man. They are part of the Space Marines, yet they are not simply another department in the Imperial chain of command. The available Imperial structure identifies Space Marines as independent armies, known as chapters, and it lists Fenris among the worlds overseen by a Space Marine chapter, rather than by an ordinary planetary governor. That single distinction changes the entire question of rank. The Space Wolves have their own internal command, their own world, and their own relationship with the wider Imperium. They are inside the Imperial war machine, but they are not managed like a normal regiment, fleet, or planetary administration. To understand how the Space Wolves hierarchy works, the first step is to separate two systems that are often blended together. One is the hierarchy of the Imperium as a galactic state. The other is the internal hierarchy of a Space Marine chapter. The Imperium divides its domain into segmenta, sectors, subsectors, star systems, and individual worlds. Segmentum commanders oversee sector commanders. Sector commanders oversee subsector commanders. Subsector commanders oversee planetary authorities. That structure exists to keep distant worlds connected to the center of Imperial power, but the source material also makes clear that not every Imperial world is ruled by a planetary governor. Some are controlled by alternative organizations. Forge worlds belong to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Cardinal worlds are devoted to the Ecclesiarchy. Space Marine chapter planets, including Fenris, form another exception. This means that the Space Wolves cannot be understood as a military unit stationed on a normal Imperial planet under a civilian governor. Fenris is presented as a chapter world. Its governing authority is therefore tied to the Space Marines themselves. At the very top of the Imperium stands the Emperor of Mankind, the nominal ruler and founder of the human empire. In the current structure described by the source, the Emperor remains the head of state, while Rebute Gilliman serves as Imperial Regent and head of government. The wider governing body is the Senatorum Imperialis. Beneath this immense political structure sits the Adeptus Terra, the central organization to which most official Imperial departments belong. The Adeptus Terra is not a single office with one simple chain of command. It is an umbrella organization whose divisions operate largely autonomously. Its most powerful individual is the Master of the Administratum, who in practice can be regarded as one of the most powerful figures in the Imperium. The Adeptus Terra includes departments responsible for administration, logistics, military organization, communications, planetary governance, navigation, justice, and other essential functions. The Space Marines are different. The Adeptus Terra source describes the Adeptus Astartes as only loosely affiliated with that central organization. That phrase is crucial. The Space Wolves are not presented as a branch that waits for routine instructions from the Master of the Administratum. They are a semi-independent military power within the Imperium. They owe allegiance to the Emperor and serve the wider human cause, but their daily command structure is maintained inside the chapter. The basic Space Marine structure identified by the material is the chapter. Space Marines are divided into independent armies known as chapters. A chapter is therefore not merely a regiment inside the Imperial Guard. It is an autonomous military organization with its own command, forces, traditions, recruitment, and operational decisions. The source does not provide a detailed list of Space Wolves' titles, nor does it establish a complete promotion route from recruit to commander. It does establish the level at which the Space Wolves exist. They are a chapter, and Fenris is associated with that chapter. That gives the first answer to the question of hierarchy. A Space Wolf does not begin inside the ordinary Imperial ladder of planetary governor, subsector commander, sector commander, and segmentum commander. Those ranks belong to the administrative structure that controls worlds and regions of space. A Space Marine chapter operates alongside that system. Its warriors may fight on worlds governed by Imperial officials, but the chapter itself remains an independent army, rather than a subordinate planetary force. The difference becomes clearer when comparing the Space Wolves with the Imperial Guard. The Imperial Navy consists of large war fleets responsible for space combat and for transporting the Imperial Guard. The Guard is one of the major military forces of the Imperium, but it is part of a broader state apparatus. Its deployments, transport, supplies, and administration depend on the departments of the Adeptus Terra. The Space Wolves may cooperate with those forces, but the source does not place them inside the Imperial Guard command chain. They are Space Marines, and Space Marines are organized as independent chapters. The same distinction applies to the Imperial Navy. A Navy commander controls ships and fleets. A chapter commander controls Space Marines. These forces can operate in the same war zone, yet their internal authority remains separate. A naval officer does not automatically outrank a Space Marine officer merely because the Navy controls the ships. A planetary authority does not automatically command the chapter simply because the fighting takes place on that world. The source material supports this separation by listing the Space Marines as their own military body, and by treating chapter planets as exceptions to ordinary planetary government. The Space Wolves therefore have two identities at once. They are an Imperial military force, and they are a self-governing chapter. Their role is defined by service to the Imperium, but their immediate command comes from within their own organization. That is why their hierarchy must be read vertically inside the chapter and horizontally across the wider Imperium. Inside the chapter, orders move through the Space Wolves' own leaders. Outside the chapter, cooperation takes place with Imperial authorities, fleets, armies, and other institutions. The available material does not establish the names of the Space Wolves' internal offices. It does not state which title is held by the chapter's supreme commander, which officers command its major formations, or how individual warriors advance through the ranks. It also does not describe the duties attached to each Space Wolf position. Those details cannot be safely reconstructed from a general account of the Imperium. A broad description of Space Marines as elite genetically modified warriors does not automatically prove the specific titles, rituals, units, or promotion rules of one chapter. That limitation matters because the Space Wolves are not interchangeable with every other Space Marine chapter. The source establishes the general category, independent chapters of elite genetically modified warriors. It does not establish that every chapter uses identical internal names or identical routes of advancement. Even when two chapters perform comparable military functions, their traditions may shape how those functions are described and who performs them. What can be established is the principle of independence. Space Marine chapters are independent armies. Their authority is not created by the Administratum's planetary bureaucracy. A chapter world may be recorded within the Imperium's larger geographic structure, but that does not turn its chapter into an ordinary provincial government. The Imperium recognizes many kinds of specialized worlds because its territories are too vast to administer through one uniform model. Fenris belongs to that wider pattern of exceptions. This is also why the question of how a Space Wolf reaches a position cannot be answered by looking at Imperial civil service promotion. The Adeptus Terra offers membership in many agencies, and even low-level membership can bring privileges unavailable to ordinary citizens. But a chapter is not described as one of those ordinary agencies. A person does not rise into the Space Wolves through the same route used by an administratum official, a naval officer, or a planetary governor. The source gives no evidence for a shared promotion ladder between those institutions. The general position of a Space Marine is also distinct from that of an ordinary Imperial soldier. The source calls the Adeptus Astartes infamous bio-enhanced shock troops. It describes Space Marines as elite, genetically modified warriors. Their military value comes from transformation into a specialized warrior class, not simply from receiving better equipment or a higher posting. This means that a Space Wolf's place in the hierarchy is connected to membership in the chapter itself. The available text does not describe the stages by which a recruit becomes a full warrior, so those stages should not be presented as established evidence here. The safest account begins with what the Imperium sees from the outside. It sees a chapter world, an independent Space Marine army, and a force that belongs to the Emperor's wider military order. Imperial administrative records can place Fenris within the galaxy's segmentum, sector, and subsector geography. They can recognize that the world exists under Imperial authority, but those records do not replace the chapter's internal command. Geography tells the Imperium where Fenris is. It does not, by itself, explain who commands the Space Wolves. The same separation appears across the Imperium. Forge worlds produce weapons for the Emperor's armies, but their internal authority comes from the Adeptus Mechanicus. Cardinal worlds focus on education and worship under the Ecclesiarchy. Space Marine worlds are another form of specialized domain. The Imperium allows entire worlds to be dedicated to one function because specialization simplifies logistics and increases output. A chapter world applies that logic to military power, concentrating the population, infrastructure, and identity of the world around the needs of its Space Marines. Yet concentration does not mean absolute control over every part of the Imperium. The Imperium itself is spread thinly across immense distances. Its territory is divided into countless worlds and regions, separated by dangerous and poorly known space. The source describes the empire as scattered rather than continuous, with vast areas beyond reliable control. In such a setting, central government cannot personally supervise every military action. Independent chapters are useful precisely because they can act as powerful local forces while remaining tied to the larger imperial cause. That arrangement creates a built-in contradiction. The Imperium needs the Space Wolves to act independently because the galaxy is too large and too dangerous for every decision to wait for central approval. At the same time, the Imperium must preserve the idea that all loyal forces ultimately serve the Emperor's order. The Space Wolves therefore possess freedom of action inside a larger political framework. Their independence is practical, but it exists within a regime that demands loyalty, obedience, and military service. The history of the Imperium explains why such a structure exists. After the Age of Strife, the Emperor began reuniting humanity under his rule. He built a vast navy and used major military forces in the Great Crusade, including the Space Marine legions led by the Primarchs. The source distinguishes those original legions from the later organization of Space Marines into independent chapters. The Great Crusade ended with the corruption and treachery of Horus and the Horus Heresy. After the heresy, the imperial military order was no longer the same as the Legiones Astartes of the earlier period. For the Space Wolves, the significance of that change is structural. The source confirms that the Legiones Astartes were the original organization, divided into 20 legions, each led by a Primarch. It also confirms that later Space Marines were divided into independent chapters. This gives a clear historical boundary between two models of command: the massive legion system of the Great Crusade and the independent chapter system that followed. The material does not supply the internal Space Wolves titles within either model, but it does show that the organization of the Space Marines changed after the heresy. That change also limits what can be inferred from early Imperial history. A title used by a legion cannot automatically be assigned to a later chapter. A command relationship that existed during the Great Crusade cannot automatically be treated as the standing relationship of the Space Wolves in the current Imperium. The source provides the broad institutional transition, but not a complete continuity of offices. The wider threats facing the Imperium make the Space Wolves' role even more important. Humanity is challenged by chaos, Tyranids, Eldar, Dark Eldar, Orcs, Tau, and Necrons. Internal dangers include rebellion, mutation, rogue psychers, and subversive cults. The Imperium responds through many specialized forces: the Imperial Guard, Imperial Navy, Adeptus Astartes, Inquisition, Adeptus Custodes, Sisters of Silence, and the Space Marines. Each organization brings a different kind of authority and capability. The Space Wolves belong to the part of that system designed for elite shock warfare. The source does not assign them a specific battle, campaign, or operational theater. It does not describe particular duties for named Space Wolf officers, but it does establish the general function of the Astartes. They are elite, genetically modified warriors and independent military chapters. Their place is therefore not routine administration, occupation duty, or ordinary mass mobilization. Their place is the concentrated use of highly specialized Space Marine force under chapter command. A Space Wolf commander operating in an Imperial war zone would consequently have to navigate more than one chain of authority. The chapter would make decisions through its own leadership. Imperial fleets might control transport and space combat. Imperial Guard commanders might control massed human armies. Planetary authorities might control local resources or civilian administration. An Inquisitor might possess authority connected to a specific investigation. The supplied material does not define the precise legal precedents among those offices, so it would be inaccurate to create a universal rule. What can be said is that these organizations are distinct, and that the Space Wolves are not simply absorbed into the command of whichever Imperial official happens to be nearby. This is the practical meaning of loose affiliation with the Adeptus Terra. The Space Wolves are part of the Imperium, but they are not described as a normal department of its central bureaucracy. They retain an internal structure that the source leaves unspecified. Their world is recognized as a chapter planet rather than an ordinary governorship. Their warriors belong to an independent army rather than a general imperial formation. Those three facts define the limits of the available hierarchy. So how does a Space Wolf reach the top? The supplied material does not say. It does not give a recruitment process, promotion test, seniority rule, battlefield qualification, or succession procedure. It cannot establish which office commands the chapter, which positions stand beneath it, or what each officer does. Any detailed ladder would require additional Space Wolves-specific material. Presenting one as if it came from this evidence would turn a general institutional description into unsupported lore. The same caution applies to the duties of individual ranks. The source tells the audience what Space Marines are in broad terms, but it does not explain the daily work of a Space Wolf officer. It does not distinguish command, logistics, training, religious responsibility, fleet operations, reconnaissance, or specialist warfare inside the chapter. Those functions may exist in a complete chapter organization, but the supplied pages do not establish their titles or allocation. What the evidence does show is enough to correct a common misunderstanding. The Space Wolves are not merely a regiment with an unusually strong reputation. They are a chapter, and a chapter is an independent army. Fenris is not simply a homeworld sitting under a conventional planetary governor. It is identified as a Space Marine chapter planet. The chapter's position is therefore both military and territorial, while the wider Imperium remains a layered system of segmenta, sectors, subsectors, worlds, departments, fleets, and specialized institutions. The hierarchy of the Space Wolves begins then with a boundary. Above them stands the Imperium's supreme political order and the Emperor to whom Imperial forces owe allegiance. Around them stand the other major Imperial institutions, each with its own authority. Beneath that external framework sits the chapter itself, operating as an independent army from its specialized world. Inside that chapter is where the Space Wolves' actual ranks and offices would have to be mapped, but the supplied evidence stops before naming them. That is not a minor technical gap, it changes the answer. A precise catalog of Space Wolves' ranks, routes to promotion, and job descriptions cannot be derived from a source that only establishes the chapter system and the Space Marines' place in the Imperium. The defensible conclusion is narrower. The Space Wolves are a Space Marine chapter based on Fenris. Chapters are independent armies. Space Marine worlds are exceptions to ordinary planetary governorship, and the Adeptus Astartes are only loosely affiliated with the Adeptus Terra. The Imperium's scale makes that arrangement possible. It controls an enormous, scattered domain in which worlds may be separated by hundreds or thousands of light years, while huge regions remain dangerous, unexplored, or beyond effective central oversight. A single bureaucracy cannot directly manage every battle or every specialized society. The Imperium instead survives through layers of delegated authority. Segmentum commanders manage sectors, sector commanders manage subsectors, planetary authorities manage worlds, where ordinary governorship applies. Special organizations manage the worlds and forces that do not fit that model. The Space Wolves are one of those special organizations. Their independence is not outside the Imperium. It is one of the ways the Imperium functions. The chapter can remain distinct while contributing elite military force to a human empire under constant attack. Its exact internal ladder is absent from the supplied material, but its constitutional position is clear. The Space Wolves command themselves as a chapter, serve within the Imperium, and stand apart from the ordinary administrative chain that governs most Imperial worlds. That is the complete hierarchy that the available evidence can support. The Emperor is at the summit of the Imperium's political order. The Adeptus Terra forms its central administrative umbrella, led in practice by the Master of the Administratum, while the Imperial Regent governs on behalf of the Emperor in the current structure described. The galaxy is divided into segmenta, sectors, subsectors, and worlds. Some worlds follow the planetary governor model. Fenris does not appear in the material as an ordinary example of that model. It is a Space Marine chapter planet. The Space Wolves therefore occupy an independent chapter command structure within the wider Imperial system, and the supplied pages do not provide the internal titles needed to go further without inventing details.